So, when did I get the idea to give up the canoe and carry all my gear on my back? The canoe gets me to where I need to go, and it carries me and my gear, all with an elegance that makes the journey just as good as the destination, perhaps even better. I like being in a canoe. I love the constant connection with the water, how responsive it is to my touch, and the sound of the canoe as it glides over the surface. As I walked the Cloche Silhouette Trail, stepping around tree roots, over vast expanses of rock, through dense forest and past scenic lookouts, my thoughts wandered to questions like, how is the trail made, who built it, and why build it at all? The park already has many trails that connect the lakes together. They are called portages, and I have spent many years walking them. Oh, I had one more unanswered question. Could an old canoe diehard like me be converted to a hiker? While dreaming of a canoe trip on a cold day in January, I was looking at the map of Killarney Provincial Park and noticed distinct areas that have always evaded me. These areas are full of contour lines in close proximity to each other and are usually between the many lakes I have paddled through. For some mysterious reason, that red dotted line of the Cloche Silhouette Trail that I had noticed so many times before now seemed to lure me with an unexpected urgency. I was inspired to try something I had never done before. I set my sights upon hiking all 80 kilometers of the trail. I didn't want this to be a solo trip, so I decided to run the idea of a 10-day hike and film project by my longtime camping and canoeing friend, Scott Jordan. He had helped me out with a previous film and was with me the first time I canoed into the Killarney backcountry 22 years ago. I was about to discover what the difference was between hiking and canoeing. I quickly learned that I would have to make a few adjustments, like changing my paddle for trekking poles and substituting my lightweight canoe gear for some ultralight backpacking gear. I met up with Scott at Killarney Outfitters around noon, made one last visual inventory of our gear, and then drove over to the park. We would be gone for 10 days, July 27th until August 5th. With our backpacks as heavy as they would ever be, we set off across the bridge and into the southwestern part of Killarney Provincial Park. This part of the trail is by far the lowest elevation of the 80 kilometers we were to travel. We crossed creeks, passed a few lakes, and climbed some modest hills on our way to H7 on Topaz Lake, our campsite for the first night. The last leg of the day's hike was the toughest, an 80-meter ascent from Bay Fin up to Topaz Lake over a 400-meter stretch. Once at the campsite, we carried out what would soon become our daily ritual after arriving at camp. Lowering our core temperatures with a swim in the lake, laundering the day's clothing, setting up our shelters, collecting firewood, making supper, a fire, and turning in for the night. Compared to the rest of the trail, the section from Topaz Lake to Three Narrows Lake is easy. However, it is not a leisurely stroll down a garden path either. It is, surprisingly, one of the most diverse sections of the trail. First of all, we had to finish climbing the Pig, the tallest portage in the park, rising 90 meters over a distance of a half a kilometer, before finding our way down alongside the south shore of Kirk Creek for a kilometer or two, crossing a bridge and returning all the way back along the north shore of the very same creek. Some hikers will attempt to cross Kirk Creek at the dam, where Three Narrows empties into Kirk Creek. We could have crossed here. The current had subsided, the rocks were now high and dry. During the spring thaw, water rushes over the top of the dam, down through the maze of rocks below, and continues down Kirk Creek until it reaches McGregor Bay. Over the course of just a few months, the scene had changed from a loud torrent of rushing water to a tranquil stream. After balancing on the ridge of a beaver dam, it was not long until we reached our first of many encounters with Three Narrows Lake. Our first stop was at H16, to stop for a break, but mostly to refill our water supply. The trail along here is surprisingly hilly and the forest is thick. An hour or so later, we stopped at H17, partly to have a break, but mostly to celebrate. Back in May, we had set out to hike the trail in 4 days. We were attempting to reach H21 on that first day, but only made it to H17. My knees were screaming at me to stop hiking, more like stop standing altogether. I'm no stranger to adversity, but this took me by surprise. I was in pain, embarrassed, and dejected. I didn't see my knees getting better anytime soon, so I had to decide that we would end the trip and head back the way we came the following morning. At that point of the film project, if I was ever going to be able to hike the entire trail, I knew I had to make some changes. I needed to get my pack weight down, and I had to address the issue of the sore knees. A bit of research had revealed to me a very common problem, especially in those of us older than 25. It's called runner's knee. The treatment for this turned out to be simple: knee braces and strengthening the muscles and ligaments around my knees. This was a long day on the trail. We arrived at H19 about 5:30. By the time we had set up camp, swam in the lake, and made supper, it wasn't until about 9 we were sitting around a fire. With a view looking out to the north, our site was located on a spit of flat rock, jutting out into Three Narrows Lake. Surrounded by water on three sides, our campsite became a kind of center stage where we celebrated our accomplishment of making it this far. The setting sun and colorful sky served as our applause, encouraging us to press on and to continue our journey. Most people take 5 to 7 days to do the trail. We wanted to really experience as much of the trail as possible. 10 days gave us enough time to stay at 9 different hiking sites, hike some long days, and hike some shorter days, and gave us time to stop along the way to enjoy the moment. Day 3 was planned to be a shorter day, a day of leisure, a sort of calm before the storm. Day 4 was to be the longest, partially because of the kilometers we needed to hike to reach our next site, but mostly because of the change in elevation in the Hansen Trail section. Total ascent 990 meters and total descent 935 meters. An early afternoon arrival on H21 gave us plenty of time to swim in Three Narrows, nap in our respective shelters, explore the rocky shoreline, eat supper, and sit by the fire, looking out across the lake to the hills that we would be scaling the following day. I have to say, taking a nap mid-afternoon while on a 10-day hike seems a bit self-indulgent, almost counterintuitive. But I don't think either of us regretted that afternoon siesta. Could there be a better place to do it? Listening to the gentle breeze blowing through the trees, gently swaying in my hammock, nothing around me for miles except more trees and lakes, and knowing that just a stone's throw away was a refreshing swim when I awoke. Days like these sometimes felt unproductive, but we could afford this luxury because of our generous timetable. I had asked former park superintendent Chuck Miller about the fastest and slowest times for completing this trail. His comment to me was, "I can't figure out why anyone would ever want to rush around such a spectacular trail." As I sat there, looking out over Three Narrows, I was in no hurry. The only sense of urgency I felt was to soak up as much leisure time as possible before a non-leisurely stroll up and over to Little Mountain Lake the following day. We arose early that morning, knowing we had a long and tough hike ahead of us. There is something exquisite about rising before dawn. First light is a beautiful time of day. I made time while packing up our equipment to get in a swim. Swimming in the lakes of Killarney is wonderful, but swimming first thing in the morning is sensational. Standing on shore with the early morning sun flooding my eyes, anticipating a cool plunge into the water, but surprised by how warm it was, all make for a memorable experience. Getting out was difficult. Not only would the morning air be cooler than the water, I would also be one step closer to leaving behind that wonderful campsite. I found it really hard to film while exhausted. The last thing I want to do is pull out the camera equipment when taking breaks on this grueling section of trail. The more obvious things on my mind were to get this sweat machine off my back and assume a relaxing position to resupply my oxygen levels. There was not a lot of creativity happening in moments like that. And the same goes for when we are burning up the calories, heading up a long incline, one arduous step after another. I told myself not to think about how hard it is, just to pick up that foot and move it forward, and now do it again. The climbing was so steep in places, and the day was so hot, that while stopping for a rest, the sweat would stream down my forearms and drip from my elbows. Near the end of the day, after many trips up and down these hills, I began to think past my present physical condition. This would become even easier as the days went on and put more kilometers on these legs. The process of hiking, I started to see, was similar to canoeing. I have experienced the same overwhelming physical exhaustion and pain while canoeing as I was now feeling during the hike, especially that day. My body was saying stop, but I know that acting on the thought every time would get me nowhere. So I kept paddling through the pain, and I kept hiking through the exhaustion until the thoughts were not so loud anymore, and the beauty and creativity began to flood my mind once again. Perseverance is worth the struggle. There's great satisfaction in doing hard things. The fact that a hike is difficult is what makes it so satisfying. Ansel Adams, the famous American photographer, observed, "There are no shortcuts to endurance. You have to train yourself to make peace with the long route every day, and do it and love where it is taking you." So, after 12.6 kilometers and almost 9 hours of hiking, we arrived at Little Mountain Lake. There would be no time for leisure, only time to get cleaned up, set up, eat, and go to bed. We were tired. I recall we barely spoke to each other for quite some time after arriving at camp. I think we both had one goal in mind, to sleep as soon as possible. We had arrived last night after the sun had cast its shadow where our campsite was located on the western shore of Little Mountain Lake. As we ate breakfast, we watched the sun streaming through the screen of tree trunks that obscured our view of the lake. While leisurely packing up our gear, we listened and watched as a canoe party paddled the length of the lake from one portage to the other. Many people and many years went into the making of the Cloche Silhouette Trail. It would be over a decade before the trail was completed in August of 1986 and opened the following summer. Jeff Holden, a former Interior Park Ranger, told me of 3 consecutive summers he spent mapping and clearing the southeast part of the trail from George Lake to David Lake. He explained to me how a brush hook and an axe were the preferred tools for clearing the trail. Park Superintendent between 1998 and 2013, Chuck Miller, explained how the cairns had to be constructed on stone, because if built on soil, the ants would set up home underneath these trail markers. The bears would then inevitably knock them over as they burrowed down to eat the ants. He also shared stories of evenings spent fishing out on Three Narrows Lake after a hard day of work on the trail. As I walk the trail, I can't help but to think of Jeff and Chuck and the people who have been there before me, the ones who have seen what I now see, even before the trail had a name, back before the park planners had rolled out their maps and inspected their aerial photographs. I can see the flotilla of aluminum canoes from park staff and volunteers paddling on Three Narrows Lake, headed back to camp on a small island after a long day of trail clearing. I can taste their dinner of canned meat, fish, rice, beans, bannock, and smell the combination of wood smoke and a damp canvas tent. I made certain to prop up my tarp high enough so I could enjoy the expansive view of the lake while laying inside my hammock. I had no need for a tarp so far on this trip. We had experienced no rain. Most nights I had pushed the tarp aside so that I had a clear view of the night sky. We had noted the continual change in the sky since the afternoon, and by early evening, a gentle rain fell, only enough to dampen the ground, but not enough to force us to seek shelter. Our fire seemed to not notice the rain and kept right on providing the warmth that we were enjoying because of the weather change. With the rain gradually subsiding, we were able to spend some time that evening listening to the frogs celebrating the arrival of the rain, witnessing a glorious sunset over the eastern shore of Boundary Lake, reading by the campfire, and a quick swim in the lake right before heading to bed. We started off our 6th day of the trail waking up to a beautiful sunrise over Boundary Lake. We knew a lot of the landscape that we would be covering because we had been on a section of this trail before. The trail from David Lake up to Silver Peak, a climb we had made many times, shares a section of the Cloche Silhouette Trail. Life on the trail brings its challenges along with its pleasures. Depending on your physical stamina and the terrain, things like sore knees, dehydration, lack of sleep, extreme weather, can all contribute to a more challenging hike than was hoped for. Foot ailments are quite common on long-distance hikes. Swelling, cramping, and blisters are the usual signs of feet that have been hiking too long in adverse conditions. A good pair of boots, keeping your feet as dry as possible, staying on top of emerging blisters, and adequate hydration are effective ways to keep your feet from screaming at you. Food can also be a challenge. Balancing enough calories and not too much weight is crucial. Finding a balance between excess and denial takes a bit of planning and a lot of experience. The weight to calorie ratio is even more important when planning food for a backpacking trip than it is for a canoe trip, for you will be carrying it on your back everywhere you go. I found that a 10-day trip was enough time to begin to miss my family. Although I was in good company, I found myself wishing I could be sharing this experience with my wife and kids. I have heard from solo hikers that it is especially difficult not to be influenced by your emotions, having no one else to talk with, no one else to help distract your thoughts. Hot days can be more problematic for the hiker than for the canoeist. When canoeing, you get a bit of a break from having to wear your backpack all the time. Even on the hottest days, there always seems to be a bit of a breeze while in the canoe, out in the middle of the lake. During our trip, the weather was typically in the high 20s with a humidex in the mid-30s. The moisture in the air made everything seem thick and wet. Some nights didn't cool down much, and we spent far too long laying on top of our sleeping bags, looking up through the trees, counting stars, and waiting for the cool night air to arrive. If you plan to hike the trail in the summer, don't forget to pack a swimsuit. Every hiking site has been situated on a lake for a few obvious reasons: availability of drinking water, magnificent views from the site, and swimming. These lakes are some of the best places to swim. Deep and clear, blue water surrounded by white quartzite rocks, perfect for launching yourself into, whether you like to jump, dive, or slowly slip into the water. The hike from Silver Lake to Bunny Rabbit Lake was only a half-day excursion, so we had lots of time to enjoy another one of these beautiful mountain lakes. As much as I would have loved to jump into a canoe on a calm summer evening and explore the shoreline, I am just as happy to swim and enjoy the one view I have from our campsite. The visibility in these lakes is similar to that of a swimming pool. I should have brought goggles with me, though I'm not sure they would have passed the "do I have room" and "how much does it weigh" test. I do love the sound of children playing in the water at the beach, but there is something very soothing about listening to the wind blow through the trees, hearing the lapping of the waves on the shore, or, at other times, the sound of nothing. Rarely did we have to share, or for that matter, rarely did we see anyone else on these lakes. For those of us who detest lineups and crowds, this is the place to be. I had never hiked 80 kilometers before. That's like hiking from Toronto to Barrie. I know that's not very far in comparison to other well-known hiking trails, but it was a long way for me because I had never done it before. I had never even come close to canoeing that distance in one trip. This was uncharted territory for me. I had to relearn how to pack my equipment since I would be carrying it for the entire 80 kilometers. On that length of a canoe trip, I might have to carry my gear for maybe 8 kilometers of that total, while the rest of the time it would sit weightless in my canoe. All my gear was kept to a minimum. If at all possible, my equipment needed to serve more than one purpose. Everything we brought needed to fall under careful scrutiny. Was it worth the weight? The camera gear necessary to film our trip does not come in an ultralight option, so we had to limit all our other gear to only that which was absolutely necessary. I don't think the Machete Boys considered the implications of packing so much equipment. We met these 4 lads on the trail as we were making our way to Little Superior Lake. They had not reached their first night's site, and after hearing their travel plans, there was no way they would make their next. I think they missed the ultralight backpacking seminar and had brought the kitchen sink along with them. Well, not literally, but I did notice a machete dangling from the outside of one of their packs. They hadn't brought that weapon in vain because we could see it had already been used on the first day of their adventure. We inquired about the gauze and duct tape around one of the boys' knees. It turned out to be a result of a wayward blow from the machete while chopping wood. The drama didn't end with that. They had also lost their map. I'm sure these guys lived to tell of their adventure, but their hike could have been so much less stressful with more preparation. We were barely an hour into the day's hike, but we were compelled to stop. Early morning sun illuminated the white quartzite hills in the distance as we looked down upon an absolutely still and glassy lake. The 5 a.m. wake-up was still fresh in our memory, but we were now fully awake and fully aware of the beauty that was ours to appreciate. Two hours later, we arrived at the crack. From this ridge, you have a clear view overlooking Killarney and OSA lakes to the west. From here we could see Site 22 on Killarney Lake, where we stayed 22 years ago on our first voyage into the backcountry. We could also see the island on OSA Lake, Site 19, where much of the footage for wilderness camping was filmed. Our respective families have paddled this corridor many times over the years. We have watched our children play and grow in this area of the park. This was my first time seeing the view from here, and it did not disappoint. We would stay here for close to an hour before descending down through the crack and on toward our next destination. A spectacle of glory, such as this view or the one first thing that morning, are moments that are deeply etched into the experience of our trip. Sometimes it's a glorious panoramic view from high up on a ridge, but other times it's more intimate, like an appreciation of the complexity of color, design, and texture of something so simple as lichen, or an evening spent enjoying the warmth around a lakeside campfire while the cool night air slowly encroaches. After hiking for 12.5 kilometers, we reached Little Chagwinda Lake. Our last campsite of the trip did not let us down. Except for a few curious day hikers checking out our site, it seemed just as remote as all the rest had felt, despite being located only a few kilometers from the main campground. After a long day of hiking in intense heat and humidity, we could think of nothing else except to drop our packs and jump into the lake. As we swam and explored the massive stone shoreline of Little Chagwinda Lake, the late afternoon, early evening sun highlighted the pink granite cliffs to the right of our campsite. These were truly one of the most spectacular rock faces of all the lakes we had been on. The Cloche Silhouette Trail is a very unique trail in many ways. Its location is culturally significant with Canadian art, most notably painters from the Group of Seven. It is one of the few major wilderness trails in Ontario and one of the few major trails in Canada that starts and ends in the same spot. The poet T.S. Eliot once wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Most hikers celebrate their accomplishment at the signpost on the northeastern side of the campground. We had decided to complete the circle and celebrate at the place where we took the first steps of our journey. As we stood on that bridge, we had literally arrived where we had started. We were not the same though, much had changed. We had come to the end of the trail, but a new journey was just beginning. I have realized that conversion from canoeist to hiker is not necessary or desirable. Traveling by the power of your own body, whether it be canoeing or hiking, has a wonderfully intoxicating rhythm to it, a certain mindfulness and intention. I still love canoeing, but have now found a new way of enjoying the backcountry, thanks to spending 10 days on the Cloche Silhouette Trail.